The storm split the sky as a chained woman stood on the auction block, her silence louder than the jeering crowd. They thought they were buying a body. Instead, they'd bought themselves a reckoning. Just as the gavel rose to seal her fate, a lone cowboy stepped from the mist, voice low but steady, "Not while I'm breathing." Lightning cracked like a whip across the sky, throwing jagged light over the courthouse square. The wind carried dust and spit, turning the torches into flickering, breathless halos that swayed above the faces of the gathered mob. They weren't whispering anymore. They were howling now, names, prices, slurs, words that used to mean things. Now they were currency. On the raised wooden dais, she stood, wrists chained before her, ankles shackled, lips split. Before we reveal why a lone rider's whisper cut through a mob's roar, what the burned scrap of a courier's coat truly carried, and how a town's forgotten conscience rose from the dust at midnight, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just stories, they're living echoes of courage, mercy, and defiance that history almost buried. Your support keeps them breathing. One click helps us ride further, dig deeper, and give voice to those chains we're meant to silence. Thank you. The rain hadn't come yet, but it threatened, like everything else. Her dress, once a soldier's linen coat, was soaked in smoke and sweat. Her hair stuck to her cheeks, but her eyes stayed locked forward, unblinking, not pleading, not anymore. Defiance had become the last thing they couldn't strip from her. A man in a preacher's coat but no collar stepped forward. His voice carried, made sharp by years of practice, and a mouth trained to quote laws twisted out of shape. "This one's wanted in 3 territories. Courier for sedition, thief of state property, harborer of runaways. But we don't concern ourselves with the North's lies tonight." He turned toward the crowd. They surged closer, teeth and hands and breath. The whole lot of them pulled in by the scent of power, wearing morality like a badge. Bidding starts at 20 coins or 10 rounds of dry powder. A murmur turned to hunger. Offers rang out like musket fire. 30, 35, a whole bushel of cartridges, a rifle, a mule. One man raised a child's locket, said it was all he had. No one laughed. She didn't flinch. Not even when someone in the front row hissed and spat at her boots. Her eyes found the preacher's and held. "What's the matter?" she said. "Scared I'll speak?" He raised the gavel in reply. It hovered there, suspended between noise and finality. And then, a sound that didn't belong. Bootsteps. Not rushed, not shouted, just slow, deliberate, like the man wearing them had all the time in the world, even if the world was ending. From the mist between 2 abandoned wagons, a figure emerged, broad-shouldered, dust-covered, hat brim low enough to shadow the face, a coat stiff with trail salt and rain. One hand rested at his hip, near a revolver that looked like it had seen more loss than war. The crowd quieted, a strange, involuntary silence, the kind that came before a lightning strike or a hanging rope snapped. He stepped into the torchlight and raised his chin just enough to speak. "Not while I'm breathing." The words weren't loud. They didn't have to be. They landed like a church bell in a graveyard plain, heavy and certain. Someone near the back laughed, but it cracked halfway out. Others just stared, unsure whether to cheer or draw. The preacher didn't lower the gavel. Not yet. "You come to buy her, stranger?" The man shook his head once. "I came to bury this town's shame." For a long second, the only sound was the wind whistling through the shuttered windows. Then someone in the crowd drew a pistol. The gavel never came down. The sun had barely cleared the buttes, and already the heat carried a weight. Not the kind that burned, but the kind that settled in your bones and told you not to stay long. Wind tugged at brittle tufts of sagebrush as the cowboy knelt in the dust, beside a horse whose flanks no longer rose with rhythm, only tremors. Its eyes were glassy, ringed with flies, and its breath came in short, panicked bursts. He placed a hand on its neck, steady, calloused, and final. "No shame in stopping," he murmured, more to the animal than himself. "You carried farther than they had any right to ask." He slid his rifle from the saddle and stepped back, gaze flicking once toward the hills, checking for witnesses who'd misunderstand mercy. Then a voice, small and unsure, broke in. "Is he gonna be okay?" The cowboy turned. A boy stood not 10 feet away, barefoot, face smudged with clay and sunburn. He couldn't have been more than 8, arms wrapped around a dented metal bucket that sloshed with water. "Not this time," the cowboy said. But he earned his rest. The boy took a hesitant step closer. "You want some water? Mama says not to give it to strangers, but—" "He looks thirsty." The cowboy offered a half-smile, quick, apologetic. "Ain't for him no more. But you be careful carrying that. You'll spill half before you get home." The boy frowned, looked down at his wobbling grip. "It's heavy. Here." The cowboy reached out, took the bucket. "Where's home?" "Up by the tannery," the boy said, pointing past the outskirts of the town where buildings gave way to brush and broken fences. "Mama says stay close today. Says the square's gonna be full again tonight." The cowboy started walking, matching the boy's stride, slow and quiet. The path curved past the empty rail depot and a line of shuttered shops with sun-bleached signs. No one watched, but every window felt like an eye. He could feel them judging the tilt of his hat, the slow drawl in his steps, the grit in his boots that didn't match this place. They reached a sagging shack with a crooked porch. A woman emerged from the doorway before they reached it, thin, worn, sleeves rolled past the elbow. She had that look, the kind that had seen too much and wasted no time. "You gettin' my boy to haul for you?" she called, wary but not unkind. "Other way round," the cowboy replied, handing her the bucket. She took it, gave him a nod of thanks, then leaned close enough that only dust could hear. "They're rounding up the outsiders again." He didn't answer. Just looked past her, toward the town's heart, where the courthouse square waited like a throat ready to close. "Midnight," she added, voice lower still. "The square." He tipped his hat. Not as thanks, as understanding. As he turned to walk away, her voice chased after him once more. "You can still leave." He didn't look back. The barn creaked with every gust of wind, timbers groaning like they remembered better years. Dust hung in the stale air, stirred by movement just out of view. Chains clinked, soft and deliberate, like someone wanted the sound to mean something. Mara knelt on the dirt floor, hands bound behind her with iron too heavy for someone unarmed. Her breath came slow, measured, not from calm, but calculation. One wrong twitch, and the man behind her gray coat, cracked knuckles, eyes like dried mud, would strike again. The welt across her cheek was already blooming. She didn't give him the satisfaction of wincing. "You coulda burned it," he muttered, pacing. "Coulda eaten it, thrown it in the creek. Hell, you coulda run into the hills and let the coyotes pick your bones. But you kept it, sewn into your damn coat." Mara didn't respond. "You think whatever's north is gonna save you?" He kicked a loose board across the floor. "You think the townsfolk give a damn about your cause?" She raised her head just enough to speak. Her voice was dry but unshaken. "You talk too much for someone who's scared." He spun, hand raised, but then the door groaned open, and a second figure entered. This one wore a badge. Sheriff Kane. Broad in the shoulders, but not from strength, from years of leaning on power like a crutch. His coat was tailored, his boots polished. He belonged to the kind of law that worked in whispers and walls. He looked Mara over like she was a ledger entry, not a person. "Is it still on her?" The captor nodded. "Inside the lining. Northbound coordinates. Marked trails, supply points. She's a runner." Kane exhaled through his nose. "A courier, then." "We sell her, word gets out. We shoot her, same thing. But if she's tried under local law, theft of township assets, transport of unvetted ordnance, that kind of thing, then it's clean. She didn't steal anything, her captor said, almost bored. She stole silence, Kane replied. And silence is what keeps this town safe. He knelt beside her, close enough for her to smell the whiskey under his breath. You'll be taken out just before dawn. Cleaned up, put on the block. If you speak, we gag you. If you fight, we break you. Either way, someone's walking home with your name in their pocket and your freedom buried 6 feet under. Mara looked up at him, and for the first time, something flickered across her face. Not fear, but grief, thin and fleeting. She wasn't grieving for herself. Do you even remember what it's like? She asked. To stand for something? Kane stood. I remember what it cost. Outside the barn, under a half-collapsed awning, the cowboy watched. He leaned against a fence post, hat pulled low. The glow of his match lit his face for a second, creased, unreadable, silent. The cigarette caught flame, flared, then dimmed to a steady orange. He drew once, held it, then flicked the butt into the dirt like it had said too much. He didn't move. Not yet. But his hand had inched a little closer to his belt. Beneath the courthouse, past a false door hidden behind records no one read anymore. The cellar was cold, even when the desert sun baked the streets above. Lanterns hung from rusted hooks, throwing light that danced across stone walls stained with old mildew and older blood. The air smelled of iron, sweat, and secrets. A table sat in the center, carved from dark timber, warped by time and decisions that should never have been made. Sheriff Kane stood over it now, sleeves rolled, collar open, knuckles pale against the grain. Before him lay a ledger, names, dates, prices, not of goods, of people. A younger deputy stood nearby, shifting his weight from boot to boot, eyes avoiding the center of the room. She's just a girl, he muttered. Kane didn't look up. No one's just anything. She's a courier. A map stitched to her coat. Routes, codes. They send them alone 'cause they draw less fire. And because they're expendable. White. She didn't come in shooting, she didn't resist. Kane flipped the page. That's not mercy. That's method. Every outsider's a fuse waiting for fire, and this town's dry enough to catch with a spark. He turned the ledger around and slid it forward. A bounty slip already inked, blotches still wet around the signature line. Midnight, Kane said. She's marked, no exceptions. The deputy hesitated, but the moment passed. Like all the others, he signed. Upstairs, the town moved like nothing was wrong. Horses were brushed, bread was baked, church bells told the hour. But in back rooms and shuttered shops, whispers passed like contraband. The square would be full tonight. There would be torches, there would be bids, coins and powder and scraps of food saved from hungry mouths, all traded for dominion over a life stripped of its name. And they called it law. Kane emerged from the cellar sometime after dusk. He walked alone down Main Street, boots echoing against the boardwalk. He paused outside the tailor's and looked at his reflection in the darkened window. The badge on his chest still gleamed. The law hadn't changed, he told himself. Only the world had. They'd lost 4 caravans last winter. A schoolhouse burned the spring before. And now? Strangers with maps. Messages tucked into hem seams. Mercy had become a luxury the town couldn't afford. He lit a cigar, letting the flame cast shadows across the scar that ran along his jawline, a memento from the day his brother died in a raid. A good man, honest, hopeful. Hope had gotten him shot. And Kane had buried him with a vow. This would never happen again. So now there were auctions. Silent ones, at first. Then louder. Now public, because public meant order. Public meant control. Inside the saloon, men passed the news like poker chips. Midnight, they whispered. Another one's up. No one said her name. Names made things human. In the shadows outside town, the cowboy heard the rustle of horses being saddled, the clink of coins counted behind closed shutters. He sat still, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. Sparks hissed against the blade. His jaw was tight. He hadn't come looking for this fight. But he'd been in towns like this before, and he knew the smell of rot when it wore a uniform. The saloon door groaned open, slow and deliberate, as if it too sensed the shift in air. Every eye turned before the boots even crossed the threshold. Sunlight spilled in behind him, catching on dust motes and cigarette haze, casting the cowboy's silhouette long and sharp across the floorboards. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze mid-lift. The piano player, sensing something ancient moving beneath the quiet, eased his hands off the keys and let silence take hold. He walked with a steady rhythm, the kind that didn't ask for permission. Spurs clinked faintly beneath the swell of waiting. The brim of his hat kept his eyes shaded, but the set of his jaw tight, immovable, spoke enough. When he reached the center of the room, he stopped. Kane was at the back, seated in the corner booth like he'd claimed the land it stood on. Two men flanked him, one with a scattergun leaned against the table, the other chewing something foul that stained his teeth and made him look rabid. Kane didn't rise. He didn't need to. The badge glinted on his chest, and the weight of a town's silence backed it. "You lookin' to drink?" Kane asked, voice even. "I'm lookin' to speak," the cowboy replied. His voice wasn't loud, but it landed like a dropped hammer. "To you." Kane leaned back, motioned to the barkeep. "Give him something. Last drink's a custom we still honor." "I'm not here for her," the cowboy said, still rooted in place. "I'm here for what this town became." A ripple went through the room somewhere between a gasp and a shiver. A few men stepped back instinctively. Others froze, trying not to be noticed. Kane didn't flinch. He reached for his glass, swirled the contents, then set it down untouched. "Then you already lost." "You used to have a line," the cowboy said. "Used to know which side of it you stood on." "I still do," Kane said. "It just moved." "You moved it." "I moved it because I had to. You don't know what it's like to bury your own blood, cowboy. To watch the same kind of folks she runs with torch, a wagon full of schoolbooks because the ink smelled northern." The cowboy's hand hovered near his hip, not threatening, just remembering. "She didn't carry fire," he said. "She carried a message. There's a difference." "You think difference matters when the graves are still fresh?" Kane stood now, slowly. He was taller than he looked, seated, broader too. Years of command had hardened him into something that resembled steel, but rust had crept in. "You ride in here with your gravel voice and hero eyes like you're still living in some story where good men win. That story died a long time ago." The cowboy stepped closer, boots on wood sounding like a countdown. "Then maybe it's time someone told a new one." Kane stared him down. "You try to stop this auction, you make yourself an enemy of the law. Then the law should have thought twice before putting chains on a truth-teller." Outside, the wind picked up, pushing tumbleweed across the road like ghosts with nowhere left to go. Inside, neither man moved. But the town was already holding its breath. The square was swollen with bodies shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath. Torches hissed against the coming storm, casting long, writhing shadows across the cracked stones and dirt. The gallows stage stood tall at the square's heart, slick with damp and pounded nails. Mara was up there, bound at the wrists, shoulders drawn back in defiance that hadn't dimmed since dawn. A rope hung near, swaying like a lazy finger counting down. Voices in the crowd were shifting now, not the rabid chants of bloodsport, but something quieter, uncertain. The cowboy stood near the edge, just beyond the ring of torchlight, arms folded, hat shadowing his eyes. He didn't move, not yet. The town needed to see itself first. Kane stood at the platform's edge, his voice rising like scripture. "This isn't punishment, it's prevention. She's not here because of what she's done, but what she carries. What she threatens to awaken in a town that's barely holding together." Someone in the crowd spat. Another nodded, most stayed still, because stillness was safer. And then, a voice, small and breaking, rang out. "She saved me." The words cracked like a shot through the hush. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled. Near the front, shoving between legs and skirts, the boy appeared. The same one with the dented bucket. Only now his face was streaked with soot, his shirt torn, one sandal missing. He stumbled forward, holding something high in a shaking hand, a scrap of scorched fabric, charred at the edges, the seam split. Ink bled through from the lining. Coordinates. Markings. Lines that curved and intersected like veins through a body. "It was in her coat," he cried. "She got me out of the tannery fire. She said not to tell anyone. Said it would put me in danger." Gasps, real ones this time, spread like fire. An old man near the front took off his hat. A woman crossed herself. Somewhere in the middle, someone whispered, "She's a courier, from the resistance." Kane's mouth opened, but nothing came. The boy stepped up to the foot of the platform, still holding the fabric high, hands trembling. "She didn't come to hurt us," he said. "She came to warn us. About the raid, about the sickness in the water. You didn't want to listen. But she did." Mara turned slightly, as much as her bindings would allow. Her eyes met the boy's, not soft, not even grateful, but steady. As if to say, "You did what they wouldn't." Kane's grip on the railing whitened. He looked at the boy, then at the scrap, then at Mara. For the first time, doubt flickered. Not enough to stop him, but enough to be seen. The crowd stirred. The cowboy stepped forward now, not fast, just enough to be noticed. One step, then another. The silence deepened. Kane's voice, when it came, cracked like old leather. "This changes nothing." But it had. It already had. Would you trade safety for silence? Or speak even when it cost you everything? The horn came low and distant at first, like a note dragged from the throat of the land itself. Heads turned toward the ridgeline just beyond the southern butte, where dust kicked up like a storm rising too late to warn against. At first, no one moved. Then the sound came again, closer now, sharper, unmistakable. Not a warning. A reckoning. Kane froze at the edge of the platform, lips tightening. His hand hovered near his hip, close to the revolver he hadn't yet drawn, but his eyes were already scanning the horizon for answers he didn't want. The crowd, once a beast of certainty, shifted in place, first with confusion, then with unease. Then came the riders. 6 of them, clad in weather-worn uniforms, the fabric dyed in slate gray and trimmed in copper thread that shimmered even beneath the storm-dulled sky. Their coats bore the sigil, 2 wings split by a flame, the mark of the High Territory Council, the only law recognized in every direction north of the divide. Not bounty men, not auctioneers. These were outriders, enforcers of the old accords, and they weren't moving fast. They didn't need to. Kane descended the steps like a man walking through water, every motion slow and tight. He tried to call something out, maybe a command, maybe a greeting, but his voice died before it reached the air. The lead rider dismounted first, tall and hard-eyed, with a ledger strapped to her side and a rifle slung across her back like an afterthought. She stepped into the square like she'd owned it once and was back to collect. "Sheriff Elias Kane," she said, not asking. Her voice carried, flat, clean, like a blade drawn against stone. "You are hereby summoned under Article 47. Charges: unlawful detainment of untried persons, profiteering through illicit human trade, obstruction of council couriers, and suspension of recognized civil protocol." The words hit harder than gunfire. Kane's mouth worked, but nothing came. "You've had 3 warnings," she added. "This is the 4th. Mara blinked, lips parting as if the rope around her wrists had just gone slack without touching a blade. The crowd, once rigid with the heat of righteous complicity, now sagged into uncertainty. Some stepped back. A few dropped their weapons entirely. The cowboy stepped forward, slow and certain, his boots thudding like a verdict. Kane finally spoke. "She's a threat," he said, pointing to Mara. "You don't know what she's carrying. She's part of the network they're trying to." "She's council marked," the outrider interrupted. "That fabric she smuggled out? Those aren't escape routes, they're medical stations, supply lines, clean water relays for border camps. You auctioned off a lifeline." Kane drew his gun, but no shot came. The cowboy had already moved, already leveled him with one quick motion, barrel steady, finger unflinching. But he didn't fire. Kane dropped the gun. Mara looked down from the platform. The crowd looked up. And the cowboy, quiet as thunder rolling off the canyon, met her eyes. "Still breathing," he muttered. She nodded once. The storm finally broke. Dawn crept over the town like a slow confession, light spreading across the square in cautious brushstrokes. The rain had stopped sometime after the horn, but the ground still bore its weight, mud packed into boots, chains rusted with it, breath visible in the cool hush that followed the storm. Smoke curled from broken torches. The platform remained, but its menace had drained with the night. The people came, not by order, but gravity. One by one, 2 by 2, families, loners, merchants, and laborers, faces both familiar and worn, gathered in the square, as if drawn by something older than duty. The saloon emptied. The schoolhouse door creaked open. Even the church bell, untouched for months, rang once soft, uncertain. Mara stood at the center, still bound, though no one guarded her. She no longer looked defiant. She looked tired, bruised beneath the eyes, dried blood at her temple. But she stood tall, as if the rope around her wrists was merely decoration now. Kane was dragged forward, arms tied behind his back, a bloodied welt blooming beneath his jaw from the scuffle. He didn't speak. The badge still clung to his chest, dented and dirtied, a lie too stubborn to fall off. The outriders didn't interfere. They stood at the edges, unspeaking, watching. This was not their moment. This belonged to the town. A murmur went through the crowd. Then the old blacksmith stepped forward. Broad hands, skin like sun-baked leather, a soot-smeared apron still tied around his waist. He looked not at Mara, not at Kane, but at the people. "We forgot who we were," he said, voice low and cracking. "This place, it used to hold a different kind of law. One where you looked a man in the eye before you judged him. One where you didn't sell someone's future 'cause fear told you it was safer." He turned to Mara. "You risked your life to bring help. You saved a boy who wasn't your own. And we," he gestured behind him, "we chose silence. That ends here." Another stepped forward. The preacher's wife, tight-lipped and stern-eyed. She nodded toward the chains. "Unfasten her." A younger man, barely more than a teen, moved to do it. The locks gave way with a squeal that sounded more like apology than metal. Mara didn't flinch, even as the cold air touched her wrists for the first time in hours. A vote was called silent, by hands, not voices. First 5, then 20. Then nearly all. Arms raised, fingers shaking, but raised all the same. Kane stared at them, stunned. No one raised a hand for him. The outriders moved then, binding him proper, reading him his rights as he was led toward a waiting wagon at the edge of town. He didn't fight. His fight was long spent. Mara stood, breathing free air again, eyes scanning the crowd not for gratitude, but for something quieter, recognition. She found the boy. He waved once. She nodded. At the far edge of the square, the cowboy turned away. She called to him. "You're just going to walk?" He paused, dust brushing past his boots. "I was never meant to stay," he said, "just to make sure someone else could." And then he walked. No applause, no farewell. Just the sound of one man leaving a place that had finally remembered what it meant to choose right over easy. The sun was barely a sliver behind the eastern ridge when the two horses crested the rise, their silhouettes long against the waking earth. The town behind them shrank with every hoofbeat, its rooftops touched in gold, its sins washed but not forgotten. The square had emptied in the night's quiet aftermath, but its silence still echoed in both of them. Neither spoke for a long while. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather, the slow breath of the animals, and the wind tugging at Mara's loose hair. She rode tall now, not with pride, but with a steadiness earned in chains. Her coat was patched, soot-stained and torn, but still carried its weight, a courier's burden, a lifeline sewn into thread. The map, once hidden in her seams, was folded carefully in her hand. She held it out toward him. "It should be you," she said. "You earned the right to carry it." He didn't look at her right away, just kept his eyes on the path ahead, the mountains waiting like silent judges. Finally, he gave a slow shake of his head. "I'm not going north." She studied his profile, the hard lines that hadn't softened even after the town turned. "You're not going back either." "No." "Then where?" He paused. The horses slowed as the trail narrowed into a stretch of loose gravel. Below them, a dry riverbed wound through the canyon like an old scar. "Don't rightly know," he said. "But it don't feel like the kind of map you ride for. It's one you earn." She smiled, just faintly. "Then why'd you come?" This time, he did look at her. Long enough for the silence to stretch between them like thread about to snap. The wind picked up, tugging at the map in her hand. "Because someone had to," he said. She tucked the map away, near her heart. They reached a fork in the road, one path veering east toward the old mining trails, the other climbing north where the sky sharpened into snowcaps. She pulled on the reins. He didn't. "Take care," she said. "You too." She turned without looking back. He waited until her figure shrank to a dot among the cliffs, her horse kicking dust like a final sentence. Then he turned west. The land rolled out before him, wild and open, stitched with stories no one had told yet. He didn't know if the next town would be better. He didn't expect it. But he knew, now, what it looked like when people remembered who they were. And maybe, just maybe, he'd remind the next one a little sooner. Back in the square, the blood had dried. The gallows had been torn down, but the dirt still held the shape of feet that had stood too still for too long. "What if next time, it's you on that platform?"